Hello, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi.
First, I'd like to acknowledge Helen and all of her marvelous research. I was in one of her sessions in Palo Alto and was one of the few people whose past life was extraterrestrial.
Oh, good.
I don't know how good it is. A lot of people will accept past lives on this planet, and they're not as readily acceptable of past lives elsewhere.
Tell us about it. What was that experience?
It was a very short experience, very emotional. I was on a small planetoid and was a bird-like creature, 2 arms, 2 legs, humanoidish, but exoskeleton rather than endoskeleton. I had a kind of hard goldenish shell. And the planetoid was not my original home. I was on service there, somehow an outpost of the race that I belonged to. And there was absolutely no life around. I had one small shelter and seemed to have monitored some equipment on the planetoid, and it was extremely lonely. I just happened to zoom in on a very lonely aspect of that life and was really shaken because of how much I missed any type of life form at all, and I really missed my race and had been there for quite a long time, and I guess I seem to recall that I would be there even longer. And just the whole rest of the day I just wandered around feeling how lonely I had been. And it was quite interesting. It was very sandy, and I walked upon the sand and got some idea that it was very hot and arid, yet was not affected by it.
Sounds like a real downer.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was intriguing. Let's hear it for endoskeletons.
It was kind of, I was intrigued by the beauty of the alienness of the creature. It was very alien, but I felt very beautiful. And
yeah, did you have another human in past life, or did you kind of stay in that emotional space?
I couldn't be hypnotized the rest of the day.
Yeah, I'm figuring what the first one was. I don't blame you. Yeah.
They laid an egg.
I was so surprised. I just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I can see why.
So I've done drawings of it from all angles and continue to draw and try to recall more details.
Yeah, the same kinds of things happen. Going back just for a moment to the past life idea, when you do these past life workshops, do you find that a lot of people come up with, well, I was Cleopatra, or I was King Henry VIII, or what happens? Just sort of briefly, what happens in the sense of you've done thousands of these things?
Yes, 6,000 of them. And it's very hard to be brief about it, because just when I think I have the phenomenon nailed down, more interesting things happen. In essence, when I first started regressing people, I found all the usual phenomenon that's been reported in lots of books on individual cases. But as I listened to the hypnotized subject or thought about it, I got hung up all the time on the question, are these people making this up as part of a dream or a fantasy? And I decided before I could explore this further, I needed to at least answer for myself the question, are people making this up under the suggestion of the hypnotist, creating it out of books, movies, and TV that they've seen, and reporting it as a past life because that's what everybody expects to do when they're hypnotized and regressed? So first I had to try and get some handle on it, and just because my background was that of psychology and statistical analysis, I knew that what I had to do, instead of finding an interesting case and reporting on it or looking up the details of an individual case, that if I wanted the answer to whether or not this was fantasy, number one, I had to set up a test. I had to decide what would tell me whether it was fantasy or not. And then I had to have enough subjects in my survey so that I could make a statistical judgment. That's what science is, really, making statistical judgments on the basis of planned experiments. So my regressions in the workshops were planned experiments. I set up 17 different tests of whether or not this was fantasy, and I did this on the basis of whether or not people saw themselves as historical characters, the question you just asked me. the question of whether people went to popular time periods, such as the Golden West in the 1850s, and Israel around the time of Christ, whether they tended to cluster their fantasies around the prominent fantasies of our culture. Then I decided to go for certain archaeological variables. Would people know what eating utensils they were supposed to be using in Israel in 25 A.D., or what kind of coins did they think they would have to have? I went for the kind of material that was a little hard to get out of the movies and the TV shows, to see whether or not large numbers of people reported the same small detail that I could guess a few subjects might know, but not that were part of general knowledge. Then the other set of variables I tested was whether or not people moved themselves in the appropriate social class. I knew a lot about fantasy. That was my business as a psychologist, to get people to fantasize and then interpret their psychological problems on the basis of what their fantasies were. So for me, fantasy or imagination is not just a wastebasket category, sort of a not true category. It is an examination of the needs and wishes of the individual. So, knowing that, I set up a bunch of variables about the kinds of fantasies I would get. One of them is very few fantasies have people poor. In our daydreams, we tend to be at least middle class, if not better. So I set up a series of variables about the fantasies under hypnotic suggestion, on social class and rank in society, role-playing in the society they were in the past life. Then I finally needed a biological variable. That is, I knew as a psychologist that if in our daydreams we see ourselves as a male or as a female, it's highly significant. Psychologists are forever devising male-female scales and analyzing one's sexual identity. So I knew as a psychologist, a professional examiner of the imagination, that it isn't just random whether we decide to picture ourselves as male or female. It's determined by attitudes of our parents and notions about sexuality. I said if this were the real past rather than fantasied past I was coming up with my subjects, the male-female ratio would be 50-50. But if it was fantasy, then there would be strong influences to be the same sex as one is now in a daydream about a past life, or a male because they have more daring do. So I said I couldn't come up with an answer about whether or not hypnotic regression was fantasy until I looked at it and examined it. So I set out a way of doing my experiments so that I get all this information, and I knew I had to have at least 1,000 subjects to have enough of a statistical base to come to a statistical conclusion. That's what I did with 1,175 subjects. I also wanted to know about population increase, because everybody says when they think about it a little while, well, reincarnation can't be true. There's so many more of us around now than there ever were. So I want to test that. So I built that into my research, too, so I could come up with a graph on population in past time periods. So that's what I did, and that's what I explored, and I had a tremendous amount of fun. I think the greatest excitement of my research was when I was working on the figures. And it's really fun to tally something up and see it form a harmonious pattern. And in all the variables I tested, the results came up that people were not reporting fantasies as psychologists normally think of fantasies. They were accurately reporting the past to the degree that I could research it on these general principles. Now, most people don't understand that's my work. They're interested, what is your most interesting case, and how does it improve somebody's life to remember a past life? And here I am scuttling about with my data sheets, and my little calculator, which is just not sexy, let's face it. But I have a peculiar bump of curiosity, so I wanted to do it that way, and I did it. This research of mine has convinced me. I'm sure other people could come up with other ways of testing whether it's fantasy. I came up with the best I could think of and convinced myself through my findings that whatever else we're dealing with, it's not fantasy the way psychiatrists normally think of it.
We're talking with Helen Wambach.
Of it. Yeah, have a lot of fun.
Well, thank you.
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
And again, all the best to you in your new book, and it's just marvelous research.
Well, thanks.
Thanks for calling and sharing that experience with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, I have a couple of questions or perhaps suggestions. One way you might verify certain times and dates, times and places in past lives is to ask about eclipses and comets, because we do have excellent information about those happenings.
You have no idea how stupid people were in past lives. I started out by trying to find out who was king, thinking I could locate people. And do you realize somebody didn't know or care who was king? You know, they just lived in this little place, and they scrabbled for their food. I'd say, who is the Pope? And they would say, damn if I know. So if I asked about eclipses, I'd have to get someone who was official moon watcher for the tribe or something.
Well, I'm thinking of a solar eclipse that would turn out the whole light. Turn out the light in the middle of the day. Everybody would be aware of that.
Well, I have to know the exact day, and I'd have to make sure I could get them all to that day. It's an idea, but it sounds kind of complicated when I think of the mechanics of getting an average group of people to go to a particular eclipse day.
When people go into a hypnotic state, what actually happens?
Well, I think it's much like what happens when we drop off to sleep at night. I think most of us know that moment we've turned off the lights, we're thinking about something that happened that day. We're kind of on a logical thinking track. You know, did I say the right thing to Joe Blow? Will he really come up with that contract? Whatever. And then we notice that our thoughts begin to get fuzzy. Instead of being focused on a kind of logical exploration of whether you can really expect Joe Blow to come up with a contract, you begin to maybe focus on the bow tie he was wearing, and that drifts you to another thought. And now and then a little face will pop up in your mind, but before you know it, you're sound asleep. This little corridor has been called the hypnagogic state. Hypno means sleep in Greek. And I use the word hypnosis because, to me, the state of consciousness people are in when I'm getting this past life information is like sleep. Okay. Now, the kind of thinking I get when people are under hypnosis is like sleep. I think I'm tapping primary process. Memory is not stored in words for most of us. Most of us are more moved by the smell of new mown grass to remember a summer in our 5-year-old childhood than we are by somebody saying, what did you do when you were 5? A smell can evoke a memory. A taste can evoke a memory. The quality of air breathed can suddenly remind us, and we'll be at the sea coast again. It is this kind of sensory memory recall. It seems stored, if you will, in the right brain, or available in the right brain, and unavailable to the word or talking self. Our culture has greatly emphasized the talking self. Almost all the education we provide children is how to talk and understand the words of others. I have also found, and I state this very definitively, between 50 and 70% of my subjects who are in a state I call hypnosis use telepathy. I check on this with each group, and therefore I think that telepathic communication is a normal function of the right brain. So, that is one aspect of hypnosis. Where are you when you're hypnotized? I think you are in the REM state of sleep because your eyelids are flickering. Most hypnotic instructions are simply patter designed to get your eyelids flickering. And when this happens, your muscles go into automatic relaxation, as they do when you're in the dream state of sleep. And that's why people who are hypnotized feel deeply relaxed, pleasant, floating. It's because their muscles are responding to a whole set of symptoms that happens when your eyeballs move under your closed eyelids. So that's where people are when they're hypnotized. But there's more to hypnosis than the altered state of consciousness you're in. When we go into this normally is not only do we do when we go to sleep at night, but when we listen to music. Music's a right brain turner on. And most of you will notice that you tend to close your eyes when you're listening to music. it is the inward sense we are responding to. The right brain doesn't want to have to process information that the eyes are bringing in. That's why we close our eyes for dreamy music. That's why we often close our eyes for certain physical activities that also turn on the right brain, such as sex. Our eyes are the part of us which is designed to check on what the external world is going to do to us next, or is doing to us, so it's an alerting sense. But hypnosis is something more. When you dream at night, you are directing your right brain thoughts. Probably your dreams are to deal with a problem, and so you deal with it symbolically, and you bring back memories of past experiences through a symbol. You might find yourself in your childhood home, arguing with your brother. Well, this may symbolize an argument you're having with someone on the job, but you're reminding yourself of how the argument turned out when you were a child, and that's done symbolically by seeing your childhood home. So in a way, the dream director is present and is different than the material of the dream. The dream director writes and casts your dreams. The hypnotist, then, is basically someone who is directing your right brain dream state. And in that sense, the hypnotist does have control. However, just as we can awaken from dreams when we don't like the way the dream director is managing it, when a stray beast wanders into our dreams and we can wake ourselves, so we can also stop responding to the hypnotist's suggestions at any time we feel are taking us into territory we don't want to go. So hypnosis is unlike the dream state in that it is being directed by somebody else's left brain and words. I get always, and I'm saying this really flatly, if I have more than 30 people in a group, I'm going to get 90% of them reporting past lives. And the major reason I do is because I am very aware of my role as dream director, and each one of my questions is extremely carefully thought out in order to provide the individual self, which I suspect includes both left and right brain, an opportunity to either agree or disagree with me. My questions are also very carefully designed to be as neutral as possible. My master's degree thesis was on test construction and opinion surveys, and I found I rely on this much more than I did my doctoral work on sexuality, Rorschach, which is what I used for that, because it's the questions you ask determine the answers you get.
Yes.
So it's a very important part of my system to devise the questions correctly. Why do my subjects feel a compulsion to answer my questions? They answer my questions to themselves. They don't have to verbalize it. But they do feel compelled to come up with an answer in their mind when I ask a question. Why? I think this is because anyone over the age of about 9 years of age in our society has learned to make the right brain subordinate to and responsive to their own left brain or directing self. You can catch yourself talking to yourself sometimes. Most of us use these right brain processes for everyday things, such as taking a test. When you sit down to answer a test, you're really up for it, your left brain is really into it, and you query your right brain. You look at a series of 5 answers and say, quick, which one do you recognize? The right brain doesn't operate by logic, but it remembers what it once perceived, and so you immediately check answer C, because it, quote, rings a bell, close quote. It doesn't ring a bell in your logical left brain, rings a bell in your right brain. The right brain has learned to be instantly responsive to left brain word commands. You have lost a sweater at a house you were at last night, and you want to go back and get it, but you've lost the address. You query your right brain. Your left brain knows which exit you took off the freeway. After that, you kind of forget. So you have to depend on the mapping that goes on in your right brain. You remember somehow you took a left turn off the freeway exit. Your body automatically turns. You drove there last night, you know you went left. Then when you try to find the cross streets you took, you rely on your right brain to flash a signal like a yellow and red shell image, and you say, oh yeah, service station. Again, the right brain remembers visual symbols, color, left, right, discriminations, kinesthetic senses. And so you rely on that sense to direct you back to the house. You find the house because you recognize how a tree curved over the driveway. You recognize the general configuration of that house.
Sure, and then you can suddenly find yourself thinking, well, gee, I got here, and I didn't think my way here.
Right. Like, you didn't logically think it. You gave your right brain commands, which instantly came up with the answers for you. And it's that facility, people who have reached the point where they're using their right brains in that way, that the hypnotist can work with.
Yeah, you mentioned the driving metaphor. It's probably, many people probably are in a hypnotic state driving along the freeway.
Oh, sure. I think we'd have many more accidents if we weren't. Because driving is a lot like touch typing. If you start thinking about it, you make mistakes. But if you let it move at a subconscious level, it'll go smoothly.
Now, taking that into everyday, dealing with everyday life, and driving is everyday life, but taking it into the problems of the office or relationships in the family and so forth, I think everyone has this touch with the intuitive sense. The intuitive flashes come up for everybody.
Right.
But most of us have trouble. Like, what happens is that powerful left brain comes in with, well, you have to rationally think it out. Is that logical? I mean, have you really done this and da-da-da? And suddenly the intuitive flash gets quashed by all of this information flowing in from the other side. And most of us don't have the ability to kind of bring that back into balance and make that bridge so that we can honor our intuitive flashes and respond to them in a way that...
usefully use our right brain.
Exactly.
Well, I think the word self or the left brain is a social construction. I think we have to understand that language is the way in which society imposes its beliefs on the child who is responding very naturally to the surroundings, responding very naturally to telepathic cues. When we teach children speech, when we teach them to read, we are teaching them how your society thinks things are managed. I have discovered that all truth is like hemlines. It comes in and out of fashion. There is no truth.
That's great.
And that's because the truths are expressed in words. And words will change as society changes, and society's designed to change.
Truth is like hemlines. That's wonderful. I'm talking with Helen Wambach.
Or at least, no, I'm not thinking of getting more than one person. I'm thinking of getting just one person to go to where there should have been an eclipse, but don't tell them that, and find out if they see it.
Yeah, I'm thinking of myself, and when we finally had an earthquake in Lafayette, I was sound asleep. I have a feeling maybe my subject was taking a nap during it. But you're right. It would be interesting to try.
One other idea is that when you ask people who they know now from a previous past, do you ever get a chance to double-check and go to that other person?
Yeah, I do, and it's been interesting. I have my subjects fill out the data sheets before they talk to each other. I found this is quite important because I do get cross correspondences of people in groups who apparently are in the same lifetime together. And a couple of days ago, I had a couple who woke up, each one scribbled on a data sheet, and then showed the data sheets to us, and sure enough, they were in the same lifetime, the same time period, the same place, the same eating utensils. Quite an evidential thing. Except you could say perhaps they were using telepathy.
Yeah. A final comment is that, as far as I know, about a year and a half ago, the Berkeley physicist group thought they had found a monopole. But since then, this has been discredited, and unless it's happened very recently, I'm sort of surprised to hear that you say that physicists had found monopoles.
Well, as usual in all these scientific countries, I believe two groups, the University of Houston and Berkeley, had very close to one another, each described what they felt was the track of a monopole. Both of them reported this from weather balloons high, say 200 miles above the Earth, and then the argument ensued as to whether what they were tracking was a monopole or something else. I do remember the controversy. I remember the initial announcement that they had found it and that two different physicist groups had found it, and then the controversy that they hadn't. But this is so typical of science, which most of us observers tend to think is either truth or untruth, and really it's an argument among a fairly small group as to whose hypothesis was proved on Tuesday and whose wasn't.
Yeah.
And one thing I have noted about science is that at first a new idea is considered impossible on the basis of physical laws of the universe. And then, after a little bit of while, suddenly you find that it's admitted to be at least possible. And then, after another passage of time, generally when the older scientists have died off, it's considered obvious. Why didn't anybody notice? So the arrival at truth is probably all of us tend to put a net on reality. We construct the net in our own head, whether we call it scientific hypothesis or anything else. And then we cast our net on the seas of the quantum waves of the universe, and we say, aha, see, my net has brought up truth. Somebody else throws in another net and says, ha, I've got the truth. And all we're really measuring is our own concepts.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your call.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, first I'd like to say this is a very nice show. It's very well done.
Thank you.
And I'd like to ask two questions. The first of which is, have you ever had two people claim to be the same person in past lives, like getting two people saying they were Julius Caesar or something like that?
Not in hypnosis. I once visited a group in some unnamed state somewhere in the Midwest, which is considered to be safe territory, and they were all claiming to run around being St. Francis, and one of them was Beethoven. And what I found is that when people are claiming all these things, it's because they get an impression, and then their ego, or their so-called rational mind, that's the greatest mislabeling in history, to call the language part of our head the reasoning mind. It's a labeling mind. And so they had decided, well, if I lived in that time and wearing this, I must be Beethoven. So they went around saying they were Beethoven. I once had a subject who was convinced he was the Emperor Nero. And he told me all about how he identified with Nero and he got all these impressions. And he wanted me to hypnotize him. And I did. And lo and behold, he was a Turkish peasant girl during the era of Nero. He was so mad at me. He kept saying, you can't prove anything by hypnosis. I know I was Nero. So the point is that it's when people in their conscious minds that they tend to think of themselves as important. When they're hypnotized, a dreadful truth emerges.
Moving right along. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello. I just wanted to comment. I have a very rich dream life, you could say, and several themes have repeated themselves in my dreams. One of them is a dream of a group of beings, and I'm one of these beings in a dream. We may be in a clearing in the woods or in the sky someplace, or just in a small group, about a dozen of us. And
probably committee meeting, ad hoc committee meeting during sleep.
That meeting. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll actually, we never speak with words, but with gestures or looks. And we toss a life towards each other, and everybody looks while that person's wearing a life that you're getting ready to perhaps choose.
Well, I have a dream like that I report in Reliving Past Lives, published by Harper & Row, available at your local bookstore, And it was a series of dreams where I was waking myself in the middle of the night with an alarm clock, which is the only way I can remember my dreams. And I used to write down my quick impressions, and some of them were pretty hilarious when I read them in the morning. One was, must go back to sleep. am dreaming but have no storyline. But one of my favorites was that the alarm went off in the morning, and I was one of 3 people conferring, as you say your group conferred, but there are 3 of us. And the alarm rang, and I said, "Oh, Lord, who am I pretending to be?" And somebody said, "You're pretending to be somebody named Helen Wambach." And I said, "Oh, okay." Zapped down into my body and woke up and stretched and did my Helen Wambach thing. But it was kind of clear to me in that dream that I was part of some overall entity thing.
Yes, it's very exhilarating, happy experience.
It was a lot more fun than being Helen Wambach.
Yes,
Thank you very much for your call. Guest on today's program is Helen Wambach, the author of Reliving Past Lives and Life Before Life, and we're talking about hypnosis and how most of us are in hypnotic states, whether we know it or not, a lot of the time.
Yeah, whenever your left brain is telling your right brain to do something, you're your own hypnotist. Self-hypnosis is how most of us get through today.
Yeah, what about some of the myths around hypnosis? I mean, you've touched on a couple of them, but it's like, I think many of us have this relationship to hypnosis like we're going to go into a deep state of trance and we're going to essentially lose control of our conscious mind. What is that? That's not the case, really.
Oh, well, no, it isn't for the vast majority of us. But I do believe that every human society that I've read about has a tradition of at least one member of the tribe being designated as the explorer of the far spaces of the mind. I do believe we have an individual memory bank based on, the new moon, hey, we ourselves have smelled, and the love or the terror we felt for another soul or individual in a past life, and perhaps repeated in this. So we have an individual memory bank of powerful emotions and sensory recall. But we also have, beyond that, a kind of a human group memory recall, which is somewhat different in quality. I have found that when people go in very deep trances, they seem to be in touch with something that suddenly takes on a slightly, I won't call it mechanical quality, but I can tell when a subject is in a trance and goes deeper than the rapid eye movement state, which is about 9 cycles per second on brainwave scale. As they go down through the lower levels of theta, which is 4 to 7 cycles per second, I can see that when I ask a question, instead of their right brain responding with a memory, their entire body begins to respond. I will ask a question such as, what are you feeling? And the entire body will crumple up and hold a shoulder. It's as though instead of thinking about the answer and searching the right brain for it, suddenly they are there and they are reliving it. There is a distinction between recalling a past life and reliving it. And it seems as though the body becomes the brain. The body expresses the psyche fully rather than kind of localizing it in our notion of cortex. But there's a level below that, 0 to 4 cycles per second. This is the deepest state of sleep at 9. Actually, your brainwaves stop momentarily as they hit 0 cycles per second. And mediums such as Jane Roberts, who I've observed in a mediumistic trance, and other people I've worked with who have gotten down to these very deep levels, seem to go through the body portion of it. When Jane becomes Seth, you can see her body change in order to reflect, if you will, to make a mirror on physical reality of the personality she is expressing, the Seth personality. But Jane goes down to a deeper level, too, in which the body becomes quite still. I've seen this with a medium I work with closely. And then the voice, instead of being expressive and sweet, it's as though you go below the emotional level to a level of a kind of a distant, kind of a almost inhuman voice quality. And then you get information from beyond, generally of a high metaphysical type that gets awfully boring. The major problem with mediums is not that we can't believe them. It's just that we get very bored with their material because it doesn't have much to do with the juicier parts of being alive. So I think in every society, they've discovered this, and they separate out one person, the shaman, or the seventh son of the seventh son, or however the society may describe it, of someone who will go into deep, deep trances and kind of get directions from the big boss of the universe, or central headquarters beyond our planet Earth. And these messages have come through from whenever we've had recorded history.
Where would that be in our culture?
Well, I think Edgar Casey is an example of a modern resurgence of this. Joseph Smith, certainly, was an Edgar Casey of his age who was formed the Mormon Church. The original founding of this country was, we say, based on religious freedom. But why did they want religious freedom? Why did they come to the United States? Because they were going into trances. The Quakers quaked. The Shakers shook. And so the denominations, even in New England, went into altered trance states.
We have this back. What about witches?
Well, of course, this has been the old folk problem for ages. Nowadays, in the new consciousness, we pounce on it as though we just invented it. We create our own reality. You know, big deal. Let's open a real estate office and create money. You know, so we're always rediscovering ancient truths. Agricultural peoples always knew this, and they always knew that if they were going to have a good crop, they better have everybody think alike. And those who were angry at the others in the society could indeed create their own reality by messing things up. This is the basis for the fear of someone breaking away from the norm of the society and opposing the goals of the rest of the people in society. These were considered witches. I suppose they were female in our culture because females were deprived of the major roles in society, so they were naturally considered the most likely to be discontented and to oppose the general reality system. So they were pointed out as witches were most commonly accused of causing the corn to grow badly, or keeping the cows from producing milk.
It's like having to have a scapegoat.
Not only having to have a scapegoat, but having to require the society that everybody think alike and have the same goals. I think that the great development in man that we're seeing in our time is not so much the development of new consciousness, because I feel this is very ancient consciousness. It's a rediscovery of ancient truths. Now, the exciting thing is that finally we're allowing individuals to set their own reality goals and we no longer have to have that massive, similar goal, similar belief system. So that in our culture in America today, we have God knows how many reality systems. So far, we're coexisting pretty well.
Yeah. So in a sense, we're really talking about what perhaps is at the root of true democracy.
Right. I think the age of Aquarius was heralded. The first notes in the symphonic theme of the age of Aquarius were sounded with the scientific revolution, with Voltaire. I do not think that science is opposed to the age of Aquarius. I think it was the first note that was sounded, because it was an attempt to get away from limited cultural perceptions and to use numbers instead of words to describe truth. It's honored in the breach rather than the observance, but still there. Then I think that was followed by the notion of political democracy. We no longer need the strong leader, the hierarchy. And therefore we no longer need the conformity of belief. And the age of Aquarius is ushered in by a new vocabulary, which is very important because words express a culture's notion of what's true, whatever the appropriate hemline is for our time period. And we have now this big plethora of different kinds of jargons, different expressions, which reflect, I think, a real outburst of creative freedom, so that I don't have to believe as my neighbor believes. I don't even have to speak the way my neighbor speaks. And therefore, I can break out of this mold that began when we first had agricultural societies.
Yeah. Now, many people are familiar with prayer or, say, meditation, focusing the mind, whatever. What is the relationship between hypnosis and getting in touch with that spiritual part of ourselves? What is the connection?
Well, I think you're being your own hypnotist. You're putting yourself in a passive position, and you're closing your eyes almost always. And then you are putting yourself in a prayerful mood by a ritual, by saying, Dear Father in Heaven, or Hare Krishna. These ritual words are designed as the hypnotist patter is designed to reassure, to provide a comfortable cultural context for moving into the altered state. And then you stay there and you're in the altered state and you move deeper. And say the black churches, the fundamentalist churches, the hypnotist preacher continues to build to the emotional, or what I call theta wave state, 47 cycles per second, where you begin to quake as the Quakers did, shake as the Shakers did, or now feel the pressure of God on you and begin to dance and speak in tongues. This is that stage of hypnosis that I can induce easily in any number of college graduates on a given Saturday. You know, I've really discovered it's not difficult. Discovered the roadmap for it. Then some of your members, whether it be in a Cleveland, Ohio suburb, in a fundamentalist holy roller church, or whether it be in Brazil, in a voodoo group, one of your members is going to fall out from the quaking and shaking and lie rigid. And then an eerie voice is going to speak through them, and it will be considered the voice of the dead, perhaps, or the voice of the Great Spirit. Now, this is similar to Jane Roberts' mediumistic trance, as Seth too. This is similar to all these trance states. Most of us, however, are so linked to our cultural beliefs and need familiar figures so that the medium is going to have guides. These are almost sub-hypnotists designed to assure everybody that they represent a continuing tradition, whether it be a white feather, an Indian, because everybody in the group is into Indians being spiritual. So the spirit guides almost serves as another cultural identity once one gets into the 0 to 4 delta trance state. Then, of course, it gets more and more attenuated, and the same message always comes through. That's what amuses me. On our cultural level, there are many, many differences, and I can't understand a holy roller in Cleveland because they drive Chevys, and all the good people I know drive Datsuns. I mean, all these small cultural differences separate us quite strongly, but as we get down to these mediumistic states, when we're in the theta state, the emotions we have are so powerful that we can often share them, which is why we like to get drunk together. Getting drunk takes you down to theta pretty quick, and so you can express body emotions. But when we get down to this trance state, all of a sudden all these differences fade, and the same reality beyond reality is expressed, whether it be by a Brazilian voodoo, Cleveland holy roller, or by some attenuated professor in Marin.
You know, we touched on how we could unconsciously make decisions in hypnotic states. How can we consciously use a hypnotic state to make decisions? Say we're facing a crucial decision in our life. How can we use hypnosis or a hypnotic state to make that decision consciously, with intention?
Okay, yeah, this is a toughie because almost all of us make it. But we make it at levels where we fool ourselves that we're not making it. For instance, if you're dependent on someone else's decision, you notice the subtle things. You know, a couple who are getting close to separation, and the wife, who usually is more cued into subconscious expression, will say, but you turned away from me at the party the other night. And you'll say, oh, how illogical. That has nothing to do with anything. So what generally smart and powerless people have done is to watch the subconscious body cues to see when a relationship's changing, and they know it. The person who is trying to attack it from a logical, rational point of view has made his decision. He just hasn't gotten his left social brain to agree with it yet, but it will happen. As a therapist, I always knew what my patients were going to do because I asked them to tell me their dreams, and it was always clearly marked in dreams ahead of time. If right now one of my listeners here is in throes of making a decision and thinks they haven't made it, I just asked them to look at their behavior, the tiniest little signs of behavior during the day. What answer did they turn away without wanting to think about it? Where did they go at 6 o'clock when they were supposed to be going home, say? And you will see then that you've made the decision. And it's just up to your conscious mind to notice it.
We're talking with Helen Wambach. And Helen, I wanted to kind of continue on the spiritual track for a moment and talk about religion and the relationship of hypnotic states to religion, and how most of us who may be involved with a traditional religion experience the rituals of religion, which are very much related to putting people into a hypnotic state, right?
Yeah, hypnotic patter.
Yes.
Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, or the Latin Mass, it doesn't matter. The repetitive syllables, the sense of familiarity of being protected as one goes into an altered state is what the ritual's about.
And that's really not from a control standpoint. It's not from like, well, we're going to put you in you're going to go into a hypnotic state so we can control the mass, but rather it's a hypnotic state to put people in touch with the deeper side, to get us in touch with that ultimate source.
Yeah, well, there's always been great tension between the heart of religion, which is to experience that which is beyond us as a little ego and personality, and the trappings religion takes on in the human group system, which means priests and religions and fusses and fights and the usual power struggles we all involve ourselves in any group activity. So I think in any religious history you will find a revitalization happening when some religious leader comes along and says, look inside yourself. There is a breaking away from a priesthood, which has become more interested in filling up the granaries than in bringing people to their own trance states.
There's also a great deal of concern about like religious leaders taking control, like the cult phenomena of like the Jonestown tragedy, where and there's lots of talk about people being under someone's control, and that gets related back to he had them hypnotized, kind of thing. We get to go back to the myth of hypnosis.
Yeah, of course, I feel that no one ever gets hypnotized against their will. A lot of people have a great need to surrender themselves to an authoritarian father figure. I think as the authoritarian family disappears, there will be less kind of hypnotic pre-programming to need.
So when you say authoritarian family, what do you mean by that?
Well, the notion, and in our culture at least, Western European culture, of the father controlling the destinies and protecting the children. This is the hierarchical sense in which religion is not the trance touch with the universe, but is our God the Father, Jehovah, who will protect us. This is a very ancient notion and a very profoundly important notion in the development of man. I think it's this that leads to cults, not the individual trance state.
Or the other side of the coin is, or punish us.
Or punish us, yes. It's the notion of needing a protector because the universe is scary and we are alone and we are frightened. And so we look to be hypnotized by someone we can place in this position of the authoritarian father. I have a feeling that as children reproduce the history of the race in the same way that the embryo reproduces a history of mammals, just as we have gills at 2-month fetus. So in the development of the child, you find this need for the hierarchical authoritative father from about 4 to about 12, where the notion of leader and hierarchy is very important. This is a kind of a developmental history of man when I think we turn from the original comfort in the mother and oceanic feeling of early childhood, which you might call matriarch, that survives in the legends of the goddess and so forth, to the male hierarchical Jehovah figure who is the basketball coach, father protecting, and that's when we need to conform. It's almost when we are pre-programmed then to be hypnotized. You can't hypnotize a kid till they've reached that stage where somebody's word is the word of God. Then people internalize that. But as we then pass through adolescence, we lose the need for the hierarchical father and start searching for our own authority and our own experience. Many people, I think cultures go through this. I think that our cultures emerged from the hierarchical, what Freud called latency period, or the need for total conformity to the group. And it's in the adolescent search period or phase. This means a lot of people are going to want to drop back into the safety and comfort of the hierarchical leader. So I don't think it's the trans-state or the explorations that lead to cults. I think it's the need to end all the questing, to return once more to a belief in Jehovah. And so you make some poor guy like Jim Jones, who wasn't that stable to begin with, into Jehovah. I sometimes feel sorry for the leader of cults, because they have projected onto them these unreasonable expectations, and most of them break under the strain and get nutty as hell.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous, it's a dangerous tightrope to walk when you assume that kind of power.
No, well, when you allow other people to project it onto you, then you've got tough times.
Yeah, but that was his choice too.
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, most people know how to sidestep it.
Yeah. You know, in some of the things that you were saying, I was kind of getting in touch with how within our bodies, not just our brains, but within our bodies is all of this incredible knowledge. And
within each cell is all of that incredible knowledge.
Right down to the cellular level, there's that knowledge. And hypnosis is a way to bridge into that knowledge.
Well, hypnosis is a way to make it explicit in words that we can all share. Almost. There are a lot of hypnotic situations. Almost any big drunken party is, in that sense, a hypnotic situation. My kind of hypnosis, at least, is basically an attempt to pull this out of the subconscious, put it in a framework of words, which, of course, removes some of its essence, but at least makes it examinable, which is what I then do.
Yeah. What is the future of your own work? Where are you going from here?
Well, right now I am in some transition about it. A large part of me wants to go adventuring further. Another part of me recognizes that my role now is to tell people what I found out, because there are a lot of people out there who want to know it. And I have to make a kind of compromise. Shall I go adventuring on my own and, as I did in my initial work, just find out something to please me? Or should I spend some time explaining to other people what I found out? And I think as anyone looks back in their lives, they see how they were prepared for where they are now. I was a college teacher for 12 years, and I can see, really, that much as I wish to be out there researching, I think I'm going to have to spend some years teaching.